Hi, Robert.
Hi, Robert Winters here. Welcome to another exciting edition of Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Robert Winters, and
Judy Nathans, back from whatever I was at.
you were down in, what was it, Washington D.C.?
Oh, that was just the weekend, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, saw the great weather, I guess, if you like 70-degree weather in December.
I do kind of like 70-degree weather.
Do you? Yeah.
I'm always reminded of, this was long before, back when we used to say global warming rather than climate change.
Yes.
There was a below the fold in the front page of the Boston Globe. It said, global warming, question mark, or just nice out.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess it's you're in denial. That's great. It's nice out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was okay with I'm okay with in denial. I kind of enjoy the nice weather. It's it's a good thing.
Right.
Definitely a good thing. So let's see. So what's up?
What's
now?
up this week? Let's see. There was a roundtable meeting at the city council, so it wasn't a regular city council meeting.
Yeah,
I went to that. That was on the 14th.
Oftentimes my days are cluttered up with teaching classes and giving exams. I still have to give final exams on Thursday.
Your real life, right?
My real life.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of a slacking off that happens right around this time of year. So I actually get to go to a few more public meetings, which is my hobby of sorts.
So beyond just the weekly city council.
Yeah, and I don't actually stay for all the city council meetings so much anymore, but I do like to at least drop in and stay for a little while.
Make sure they see you.
Sort of take the temperature, see if anything interesting. If it starts to get a little too boring or people start droning on too much, I'll head home. Yeah. But anyway, there were a couple of things happened this week. Actually, the first thing I thought maybe we'd mention is a thing on the participatory budgeting.
Oh, I did vote. Yeah.
You did?
Before I left, because it was. You had to do it by Saturday, hopefully people.
Right, so that wrapped up on the 12th. Today is the 15th of December. And I believe on Thursday night, I won't be able to go there, but they do the vote results announcements.
I didn't see that.
At the senior center.
Oh, you know that?
Yeah, I'm not...
You think they would send an email out to people that voted?
I think if you were, depending on who is... Well, I voted in person, and they had these yellow flyers.
But then it wasn't available.
And actually, when I first did it, they didn't give me the flyer, but I went back to get my little green sticker, and they said, "Oh, you want one of these too?" And I said,
All right,
yeah.
So you know for a fact it is on
so
Thursday?
For those who are really interested, they're having the vote results party this Thursday, December 17th, from 7 to 8 p.m. at the Central Square Senior Center.
Great. Thank you for that information.
Sort of interesting.
All right.
I'm going to say I was a little skeptical when they started participatory budgeting, and I've kind of warmed up to it for the most part. But I'm starting to trend a little back toward the skeptical.
Because of the things that they voted on last time?
No, not so much that. I think I understand how it takes time to actually implement some things, and they've actually have completely done some of the things from last year's cycle. The concern I had, I forget where I saw this. Some people were expressing some concern about whether there was adequate outreach this year, and I don't know whether there was or wasn't, honestly.
You mean to choose the topics, to choose the areas?
No, not so much that, but actually just to get the word out to people to vote.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
And it's a concern for me because for I think 23 items, there were, just as an example, not to harp on this, but there were 3 that were bicycle related. Well, I happen to be on various lists that get email announcements, and I can't tell you, I must have been prompted at least 6 times to go vote on participatory budgeting. So I think anyone who had any interest in cycling probably got
a lot more votes.
Yeah, got a lot of alerts.
Well, that's true because although I really supported it, Food for Free sent out an e-blast to their supporters, which is many, and said if you live in Cambridge or know someone, they're with the food rescue van.
And you convinced me to vote for that,
See?
By the way.
So it's all networking. It's all social media. And these organizations, some of them use social media. They got their voters to vote.
Yeah, and I like to think of it analogously to if you were to decide public policy based on who shows up at city council meetings, this would be one hell of a weird city.
Right. Yeah, so it is, you're right. I mean, that's...
Well, I have a concern because, as everybody in the city perhaps knows, I have an interest in elections, which is really part of a category of what they call social choice.
Right.
And the thing is that unless you have an appropriate or at least reasonable semblance of representativeness in the voting population,
that's right.
it kind of makes the elections kind of meaningless in a way.
I agree.
So I need to be a little bit more convinced, and I'm not saying that this was non-representative, but I think I need a little more convincing that this is really being put out there. So it's not just a matter of.
I will bring that up if I'm allowed, but it sounds like it's a party, but I don't know. Will they tell us how many votes were cast?
They didn't last time.
See, that's secret.
They just basically came up with the 5 or 6. I forget how many they were actually.
6.
Well, actually,
you can vote up to 6.
You can vote for up to 6, but how many actually get selected would, to some degree, depend upon the budget, because it's $600,000 to spend, and if a $350,000 item is one of the ones that got the okay, then
it doesn't leave much.
It starts to, so you could have relatively few items actually selected, or you could have many smaller.
They should do, you know how you have on auctions, they have a minimum bid?
Yeah.
Otherwise it gets withdrawn. I think on these kinds of things, they should have it has to have a certain number of voters to get chosen, especially if it's a really big item.
I could go for that.
Although I don't, or a certain percentage of the total.
Well,
but I don't know how. Again, we don't know.
Yeah, my other concern about this was that I could identify at least 2 of the 23, which had all the markings of city departments acting through individuals to have these appear essentially as a supplemental budget item done through the participatory budgeting process.
It had to come through individuals not related to the government?
I'm not sure.
I thought anybody could propose things.
Maybe so, but I think that if you had the city budget, if it was city departments who were the ones who were directly putting them all in, people might start to raise some issues about it.
Yeah, well, the one about the schools was funny.
Yeah, there was chairs, buying chairs for schools, or there was one thing about putting in traffic control devices for the number 1
should
bus.
Be under the Department of
Traffic Parking Transportation.
Exactly. So that's interesting. You're right.
And even the head of Traffic Parking Transportation was saying at a city council meeting a couple weeks ago, well, we're kind of hoping that we're going to be able to pick this up here through the participatory budget process.
So you know what? Maybe it's a wish list that each of these departments has, because they know they don't have the budget for it. Just like the Welcome to Cambridge, the LED sign. I mean, you'd think that would be tourism, but I don't know what their budget is. So.
Yeah. So anyway, that was some concerns I had about that.
We'll try to get.
But as I say, if you're interested, I mean, I'm sure the information will be posted on the city websites and put all around anyway.
All right,
but it's Thursday. This Thursday, 7 to 8 at Central Square Senior Center.
I'm going to try to go to that.
Now, as mentioned earlier, this is the time of year I get to go to more public meetings. So Monday was sort of, there were actually, if I'm not mistaken, there might have even been 3 things going on. There was a ordinance committee meeting. There were all these flock of zoning petitions that popped up. There were like 12 to 14 ordinance committee meetings all within a month and a half.
Wow. And where were those held? At the planning committee?
Those are all up at Sullivan Chamber in City Hall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because that's the City Council's ordinance committee.
Oh, I see.
And so anyway, there was one I went to on Monday afternoon, which was a public safety committee meeting. And the topic for that one was recently they had unveiled the latest version of the climate change vulnerability assessment update. I didn't
go to that. It was at the library.
Yeah, I couldn't go because I was teaching a class then. So I went there, and again, I don't know what exactly the role of the city council is at this stage right now, because right now it's just sort of coming up with reports, and I don't know that there are action items sort of before anybody yet about it. But Craig Kelly was the chair. They had the hearing. There were a lot of city officials up there, a few members of the public, not that many. And to me, it was interesting. One of the things that I think anyone who serves on a board or commission should understand, or who goes to public meetings, is that it's a little bit like going to school. You can learn things, and and there's sometimes you actually have learned things along the road, and then you're just waiting for others to say them, or else you're waiting to correct them if they don't get it. So one of the city councilors actually raised the issue about what can be done, because one of the 2 big items, I think, fair to say, for on the latest edition of this climate change vulnerability assessment were the prospect of extended heat waves, in decades from now. It wasn't so much like, and in terms of water.
Yeah, I thought it'd be more about flooding.
But it wasn't the flooding of sea, the sea overtopping banks so much as extended periods of very heavy rainstorms. and then the inability to evacuate the water in some parts of the city. There are, the port, which will, if maybe it'll actually have a port for the first time ever in big rain events, but Area 4 / the port or Wellington, Harrington are kind of relatively low lying areas. Some parts of Cambridgeport as well.
Yeah.
But certainly the Alewife area is really relatively few feet above sea level. But it's also just sort of flat, and it's not like there's a great gradient that allows water to just evacuate the area very easily. And that so much has been covered up. Any water courses that were there historically have been, funneled into tiny little culverts and whatnot. So there's a serious problem of flooding. But so one of the city councilors raised the issue of, well, is there anything we can do, in advance of these threats in the future, to help in the, build wetlands and to, grow the, to allow more absorption of the water. And I'm sitting there in the audience saying, well, if you know anything about the soils in North Cambridge, and the history of the brickyards, it's all clay. And it's really like a big teacup. There is no water absorption, essentially. So when water's in there, it just sits there until you can get it out of there. And I was waiting. I hope somebody's going to say, and no, listen, let me tell you, the former city engineer is now the Commissioner of Public Works, Owen Reardon, and Owen he just said it exactly right. He says you really need to understand the soils here. There's essentially nothing that can be done to allow for more water storage other than building bigger basins. And it's really the bigger issue is just how do you evacuate water in rain events.
Can't drill like holes really deep down.
Maybe
seriously, like a tunnel or something.
Well, actually, that's a big storage basin essentially. Then.
Oh, okay.
And there have been actually MWRA plans in the past for building deep tunnel storage. They have in some cities like Milwaukee and elsewhere. But and then you pump it out after the rain event. That's essentially.
Can't you create like a new body of water?
You can do it, but it's all you're doing then is sort of spreading the wealth, just sort of a little more storage, but the bigger issue is still getting it out of the way. And there's actually railroad tracks have intervened to kind of block water courses. Maybe there need to be more culverts to allow more free movement of water. The Alewife Brook itself has been just narrowed down to this stone lined or concrete lined minimal passageway. The bridges for Mass Ave and some of the other ones are actual hindrances to moving water out of the area. So I think ultimately part of the preparedness for climate change vulnerability has to include rebuilding bridges to allow free flowing of water underneath them. There's the old Craddock Dam, there's the Amelia Earhart Dam, probably, I'm not sure if it has adequate pumping capacity.
Amelia Earhart, where is that?
That's on the Mystic River. So as the Alewife gets to the Mystic, there are remnants of old dams, and they essentially serve as obstructions. And if you can imagine a really major event where debris was then carried in there, it would just clog up everything and could be really disastrous. So just the movement of water to get it out of there is something I think it's pretty significant. One of the things I thought was somewhat lacking in the climate change vulnerability report, and I mentioned, I testified at this, was they expressed some concern over power generation. Would you lose a power plant, which would be a real problem in an emergency? And that was apparently is not the biggest. Maybe there's a power substation up around Alewife that's would be vulnerable.
Would be submerged. That happened in New York City.
Yeah. But the other problem, which was not addressed, if you're going to have extended heat waves, I'm not at all convinced that the electrical grid, just the power lines, serving every individual block.
To support, you mean the air conditioning? And all
the thing is, if people are actually going to use power, and hopefully, you might actually have a future where there's plenty of electrical power through renewable resources. But once you put it on the grid, it starts burning out the wires because everybody wants to use it to stay cool.
You're going to have to have restrictions.
Well, you're going to have restrictions, but ultimately you're also going to have things just burning out. And I think that a proper solution is going to have to involve upgrading of some of the lines routinely around the city, which is really Eversource's capital investments.
So is it
issue.
pretty old then, you're saying? I mean,
A lot of it's very
farming.
old. I mean, I can just say that until it burnt out recently in my house,
Oh, that's right, you have that problem.
it's direct bury cable. It's not even in a conduit. It's just a wire in the dirt.
Wow.
And that's actually really common wherever the first generations of the burying of utility wires took place. It's not even in conduits. It's just old wires sticking in dirt and they're falling apart. And I think that does
Doesn't sound good, Robert.
No, it
Anything
doesn't.
more positive? Let's see, we
Well-
got too much water. We can't get rid of the water. The substations are pretty substandard. What else?
Well, it was actually one concern. One thing I testified about was, there's always the possibility of like what happens if you flood out the subways, right?
Yes.
And it did happen in
Yes.
Kenmore Square,
Right.
where I
Happened
remember
in
seeing
the-
it where you
yes.
could look down into the Kenmore
Into the
Square
steps,
station and
right.
just look down the steps and it
Right.
was just filled with water.
Right.
And the thing that made that so ridiculous was how totally preventable it was.
By,
Well,
What?
the where the portal is, where the tunnel goes down to Kenmore from the Longwood,
yeah,
because it was really the flooding from the Muddy River area.
right,
When they built the subway,
yeah.
they put in indentations in the wall to drop in flashboards that should be inserted to prevent water from cascading into the
Oh,
tunnel in
okay,
the event of
yeah.
emergency. All right, roll the clock forward 100 years, nobody remembered.
Oh.
And so the water just cascaded in and
So
took
they
out
could have just put
millions
the-
of dollars in damage.
Jeez.
And now they know. So they not only put in boards, but they sandbag and they basically seal
But
off the
didn't
tunnel.
this happen in New York with Hurricane Sandy? Didn't some subways get flooded? Or
Yeah,
am
and I
I
think
wrong about that?
Very much it's true.
So
And
did they not do the same thing?
they didn't. I don't think they had anticipated
Well,
this.
who did, right? Yeah.
Right. So, but now they do. Now that's
Oh,
part
yeah.
of they're doing
Really?
major climate change vulnerability
Wow.
assessments in New York right
That's
now.
interesting.
And they're hardening infrastructure, and that includes things like knowing when to bring out the sandbags, simple things like that.
Huh.
Yeah. So anyway, I found it interesting. As I
Yeah.
say, sometimes you go to these public meetings, it's educational. There's some things I understood, some things I didn't. I had never
Right.
really thought about.
So that was the public safety meeting on the climate.
Yeah, I actually
vulnerability
I
system.
recommended to the city councilors that they should take a trip to the city of Lowell, where there's a fine example of anticipation of how do you do disaster prevention caused by major weather-related events. And on the Pawtucket Canal, which is built in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there was some concern that when allowing this canal, if the Merrimack River flooded,
Right.
it would just cascade through this newly built canal and would wipe out the city. And so somebody said, well, we're going to put in essentially a cork. It's going to be this big, heavy wooden gate, and it's going to be hanging from above the lock.
Huh.
And then if there's a gigantic flood event, somebody's going to go up there with an axe and just whack it,
Oh my gosh.
cut the hook. It's going to drop into place. And sure enough, a few years after they built
Yeah,
it,
they had to do it?
they had to do it. They dropped it and they saved the city.
Wow. Now,
And
did they have to rebuild the,
Well, then they have to bring in a crane. They have to lift it back up and
oh, it still
reattach
can be
it.
used, okay.
It was used, I believe, twice historically, and nowadays they could drop it, but it's a historic structure.
Yes.
So they leave it in place, and
I
now
see.
they come in with like caissons, and they essentially block it off
Oh,
right at
wow.
ground level and bag it, so that water can't come in and wipe out the city. So,
That's interesting.
and I was talking to Councilor Carlone about it too.
Yeah.
And basically we're in agreement that
Yeah.
once upon a time when engineers were building things like canals, they actually thought about this stuff. So in a way, we could learn a lot from our
Yeah.
engineers of 200 years ago.
200, but maybe not so much from, yeah.
Yeah,
A lot of criticism from Katrina about the engineers and
absolutely.
that. All right, so we covered that. What other meetings? Did you go to any others?
Went on Tuesday, this is Tuesday,
Right.
Afterwards about,
There is a meeting, I think, going on right now of something.
yeah,
I think I read that.
yeah,
Some kind of petition, some zoning thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can't make them all.
No, I mean, hey,
But I went to there was an hour after the Public Safety Committee meeting on Monday, there was a City Council
on the transportation.
roundtable on
Yeah.
transportation. And I think transportation is kind of a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure we address it as holistically as we should.
Mm-hmm.
I was reflecting back how if this was 15, well, maybe not 15, but 20, 25 years ago, and people were going to talk about transportation, people would come out largely in numbers and they would complain about traffic and parking. Right? There's not enough parking, or there's too much parking, or there's not enough carpooling, or whatever. But it was very much sort of based on the right and wrong ways to manage automobile transportation. I think it was also things about, should we have truck restrictions? There was a big thing about HALT. It was called HALT. It was humans against loud trucks. It was based in Cambridgeport, I believe.
Well, I think on River Street there was some sanctions put out. You couldn't go before a certain time.
Oh yeah, and there are definitely vestiges left now of those days. But it was the point is primarily here that when people talked about transportation, it was primarily motor vehicles. Now it's like the pendulum has swung so thoroughly the other way.
Bicycles.
Well, maybe for good.
Yeah.
But now I'm a little concerned that when you go to a city council roundtable meeting on transportation, and then they spend 3/4 of the time talking about bicycle infrastructure.
Well, no, why is that? Who gets invited to a roundtable, by the way?
Well, anybody can go, but as a city council, there's no public testimony.
Right,
first
I
off.
saw that. But then who gets to sit and talk?
People from the city departments.
So they had.
Well, they had people from Public Works.
Okay.
And they had people, director of traffic, parking and transportation. But they also had people from the traffic or transportation planning division, environmental and transportation planning division within the community development department here as well.
Okay.
Right.
Well, a lot of these departments are under community development, aren't they?
Well, the traffic or the transportation and environmental planning division is, and I think
so is the bicycle,
right, and the bike committees and pedestrian committees.
Right.
I mean, some of this thing is sort of a historical fluke in a way. Once upon a time, there was back around 1990, there was a proposal for what they call the Cambridge Environmental Program, which eventually got established within the city manager's office. But it was really done in response to what was then a growing concern about the difficulties associated with what was called the interim parking freeze. And just to sort of roll this, probably I could go on about this, but even going back into the 1970s with the passage of the Clean Air Act.
Oh, right, there was a certain number of spaces.
But what had happened is Cambridge, my understanding is that it was out of fear that East Cambridge would become the parking lot for downtown Boston, that Cambridge voluntarily signed on to certain provisions in the state implementation plan of the Clean Air Act to basically put some restrictions on parking garages. They did it for one reason, but then maybe 15, 20 years later, it sort of comes back to bite them when there was a sort of a revival of some commercial development and down around like when the Kendall Cinema Complex and One Kendall Square was developed, where a group called Cambridge Citizens for Livable Neighborhoods emerged and basically said there's a parking restrictions here. You can't build these garages, and it became litigated, and I believe it was settled. It was never decided, but there was a settlement made where the city agreed to an interim parking freeze, which put restrictions on how many new commercial parking spaces would be permitted. Now, this then put a real damper on the ability to allow businesses to open in what's now Kendall Square and elsewhere. So the restrictions of the parking freeze were kind of a bit of a problem. So they did several things, like, for example, for every 2 on-street unregulated parking spaces, you could regulate them with parking meters or making them resident only, and then you'd be able to put 1 space in what they called the parking bank. And then if somebody wanted to build a new development somewhere in the city, they needed to have a requisite number of parking spaces, and they had to go to the bank. If there was no spaces in the bank, you couldn't build the building.
So what happened? Because there seems to be a lot of parking down there.
What happened was the city moved, I think correctly, to move away from that and amend the state implementation, Cambridge's contribution to the state implementation plan for the Clean Air Act, the SIP agreement, to create what they called the Vehicle Trip Reduction Ordinance. And this was a bit more of a more thoughtful approach rather than just a hammer
can't do this, right?
Yeah, and some of the groups Conservation Law Foundation disagreed at the time, but I believe it sort of went on through. But as part of that, ever since then, the city has basically been committed to taking on all sorts of promotion of alternative transportation, including bicycles.
Right.
And other,
And also encouraging businesses, I think, to give for public
T-passes
for their
for
employees and to encourage them.
Yeah.
Right.
And most of these are pretty good things.
Right.
But in a way, the pendulum has kind of swung in many respects, so that now, for example, I'm absolutely convinced that at the end of Cambridge Park Drive, we could really use a full vehicular second means of egress over the railroad tracks toward Concord Avenue. That would be for motor vehicles as well as bikes and pedestrians, but you will never get the administration to sort of agree to the wisdom of that, because it's going to only be bikes and pedestrians, regardless of how, even if there are other really compelling reasons to make it for all vehicles. Similarly, they were doing a realignment of the Mass Pike. This is over on the Boston side. But
there's a meeting actually of that tonight.
It's tonight? Yeah.
I think it is, the Alston,
And for that, I look at that and I see, okay, they're going to make some new bicycle pedestrian connections, but I think to myself, it'd be really great if they could connect Babcock Street down near where the old Braves Stadium was and have another connection over there.
I hadn't thought of that.
It would be a fabulous
that goes right through the railroad yard, but that
would
goes
go
into Starro Drive, right?
Right, but the thing is, they're already building structures proposed over that anyway to allow for bikes.
That'll never get built.
Right. So anyway,
it would be nice if that area that was made safer for bikes, because right now it's not even safe for walkers.
No, and it will be.
Okay, that's interesting.
So anyway, we're down to our last 15 seconds here, but we're going to come back and continue
discuss more of these.
We'll talk some more about this and many other things.
Okay, Cambridge Inside Out, going out.
Well, actually,
not
no.
Quite,
we got
10 seconds.
No, we got to go. We got 6 whole
8
seconds.
seconds. All right. Well.
All right.
Just stay tuned.
And I'll see you in a few minutes. Bye.
Bye.